Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third and final event in our Singapore Trade Mission series, an introduction to commercialization capabilities in Australia. My name is Jeff Malone, and I'm the CEO of BioMelbourne Network, and it's my great pleasure to be here to host the discussion today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their continued connections to land, sea, and culture. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be online today. I'm personally joining you from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Thank you to all of our trade mission partners, BioMelbourne Network members, colleagues, and new connections in Singapore and Asia Pacific for dialing into the session. A special welcome again to any of the startups, medtech companies, et cetera. This is the third and final virtual event related to the trade mission that has been conducted in partnership with Global Victoria. The session has been developed to help showcase just some of the amazing capabilities we have across the Victorian medtech commercialization ecosystem. They'll also share insights from their experience to help you in research, translation, and commercialization journey for your own organization or startup. I'd also like to remind everyone that the session will be made available after this event, and we will put a copy of the link in the chat later on. It has all the information about the trade mission, list of all the partners in the trade missions and startups, and all the information related to the service providers here in Victoria, along with their capabilities and contact information. Lastly, I'd like to mention that we have our Willem Life Sciences Industry Community established, and you can all get a free account. If you haven't done so, I encourage you to go on and do that. That will allow you to connect directly into the life sciences community here in Victoria. And there is a special room set up specifically for the Victoria, Singapore, Asia Pacific trade. Following on from this, I guess I'd like to take the opportunity to offer a special thanks, of course, to all of our trade mission partners, without whom this initiative would not have been possible. Our sincere thanks to Global Victoria, who is our main sponsor on the event. Also to Invest Victoria, who partnered with us during our visit to Singapore. Of course, Enterprise Singapore, the MedTech Actuator, A-Start Central, MedTech Innovator, Jumpstart, and Singapore Biodesign. In terms of housekeeping, attendees have been muted for the duration of the event. However, we do encourage you to submit questions or comments for our speakers via the Q&A function at the bottom. Do so throughout the event at any time. We'll address your questions towards the end of the discussion. It's now my pleasure to introduce and welcome our first speaker, Oded VanHam. Oded has spent more than 20 years in the intersection of science and business with a master's degree in both molecular biology and international business. As the client engagement facilitator for medical technologies at the Australian National Fabrication Facility, Oded is responsible for assisting industry and researchers in developing and commercializing technologies by connecting them with ANFF's cutting-edge facilities and expertise. So with that, thank you very much for joining us today, Oded, and welcome to the event. Over to you. We've got the classic, you're on mute, Oded.
Sorry, I had everything set up and then I couldn't find the screen to unmute myself. So
That's
I'll share
right.
again.
That's all right.
And here we go.
Good.
So thank you, Jeff, and to the BioMelbourne Network for this opportunity to speak to you all today. As Jeff said, I'm a client engagement facilitator from the Australian National Fabrication Facility. I'll start by describing what what ANFF is, or ANFF. We were established by the Australian government back in 2007 as part of the NCRIS program. That's the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Strategy Program. And that was an initiative to develop infrastructure in Australia that wouldn't exist if it weren't for government kind of stepping in and establishing it. Because we provide access to equipment that wouldn't exist because it's too expensive for most industry companies to purchase. and provides R&D communities with open access to advanced manufacturing capabilities. And the network is made of 21 hubs organized into 8 specialist nodes across Australia. So what is it that we do? ANFF supports industry and research. We provide access to leading edge manufacturing facilities and expertise. Over the 15 years that ANFF has been around, we've invested $500 million in equipment. And along with that, we've got expertise that is able to take that equipment and make the most out of it, really pushing the envelope of what's possible. So what do? We help companies and researchers innovate in all sectors, but we've got a particular expertise in medical devices. We help develop or new or innovate existing products. So if you're working on a prototype, or if you've got an existing product that you're looking to improve on, we help with that. We allow you to trial advanced techniques, things that you thought you'd want to do, but didn't realize you had access to the equipment and the expertise to try it. We help overcome manufacturing challenges. If you've got a defect and you want to find out, characterize it, or you've got a contaminant and you want it identified, we can help do that. Or relocate advanced manufacturing from overseas. And there are many reasons that you might choose to do that with us here in Australia. My next, there it is. So I talked about $500 million invested in equipment. Now we've got over 500 individual capabilities, and this slide is quite busy because the toughest thing I have to explain is really what are our capabilities. We've got leading edge equipment that is available to leading world-class equipment that is split across many different areas, and this slide shows kind of 8 kind of categories of capabilities and how they're split out among our many hubs. We've got everything from fiber brags to advanced microfluidics, coatings, micro milling, to nano fabrication, to fibers and textiles, to characterization, to fiber optics. Again, what we do, the capabilities that we have, is the toughest thing I have to answer. So toughest question I have to answer. So my suggestion is, if you're working in the field of kind of pushing the envelope of what's possible in manufacturing, we're probably in that space and able to support that. I'll now kind of talk about some case studies of companies that we've helped. The first, many of you might have heard of Vaxxus. Vaxxus is an Australian company that's developing an alternative to injected vaccines. And what they do is they've developed a patch that's it's just kind of tap on the skin, and without kind of penetrating very deeply at all, it's able to transfer a vaccine, and the results show that it's as effective as an injected vaccine. Now, their fundamental technology was developed at ANFF. At one location to develop the basic technique, and then they took it with one material, then they took it to another of our locations to prepare it on silicon, and now they're mass producing it at another facility, not an ANFF facility, but the fundamental technology was developed at ANFF. And as you can see in this slide, these needles are really tiny. The length of this little space is 50 microns. Another case study is MicroX. It's an ASX listed company that make lightweight X-ray machines. They're also developing new products, including a portable CT scanner, airport screening machines, and bomb detectors. ANFF has worked with MicroX for over a decade, supporting the development of their core carbon nanotube technology. We also make at one location, we make a fine tungsten mesh using laser milling capabilities at another location. So every Micro X device has an ANFF part in it. They have also, most recently, they've been testing out 3D printing of ceramics at another location, just to see whether that's will work for them, and it allows them to de-risk the purchase of the equipment necessary to do that themselves. Final case study very quickly is a lickable diabetes test, where instead of, it's a pain-free way of testing for glucose levels using a lickable tab, and that's manufactured using one of our roll-to-roll printing facilities. So as I said, I hope with these case studies to really demonstrate the diversity of capabilities that ANFF has. Now, working with us is quite easy. ANFF really exists to help companies help with innovation. We're not for profit. We're really genuinely here to help research innovate. So as a result, we make it, keep the barriers to using it as low as possible. We take no part in IP. We're government funded, and our fees are quite low. We're frankly subsidized, so using us is quite cheap, frankly. And as I said, you can engage with ANFF for open access to tools and processes. And what I mean by open access is that if you see a piece of equipment, it might be $1 million, $2 million machine that you think might be of use to you, and you want to kind of give it a try, and you have the capability to do so, you can book the machine at our facility. So everything is open access. You might not know how to use the machine, so we offer training as well. We also do fee-for-service work. So if you have the specs for a device that you want created, you can work with our team to develop that and make that on your behalf. We also offer project advice and consultancy. It was mentioned before that I'm a client engagement facilitator. Now I thought to explain what that is, my role is to help find the capability that you need within ANFF. As I described before, as I tried to describe before, is the sheer number of capabilities that we have, the diversity of capabilities that we have are quite numerous, and they're all located over 21 locations across Australia. So we acknowledge that it's maybe difficult to find who to talk to within ANFF to find the capability that you need, the solution to the problem that you're facing. So that's where I come in. I'm a single point of contact where you can simply reach out to me and say, Oded, I'm looking, I've got this manufacturing challenge I'm having a tough time overcoming. Is there somebody within ANFF that can help me with that capability or solve this problem? So I concierge that request on your behalf. I engage with the network, and I find the best solution for you, regardless of where that solution may be. It may be within ANFF, it may be outside of ANFF. And the great thing is that because we've got some amazing experts in the field, if we don't have a capability within ANFF, our team usually knows where to turn to, and I can kind of give you make an introduction and give you a suggestion as to where to go to next. Now, a question you may be asking is, if I'm in Singapore, why connect to ANFF all the way in Australia? Now, I acknowledge that Singapore has a lot of the similar capabilities that we have. Some amazing capabilities exist in Singapore already. But ANFF very likely has unique capabilities that Singapore doesn't have. There's some piece of equipment that we have that are unique to Australia, and there are very few around the world. So you may be coming to us simply because we've got a capability that doesn't exist locally for you. You may also be going internationally to someplace else that may have it, but Singapore offers a low dollar, low sovereign risk. We're a stable country. ANFF has been around for 15 years, and we've got funding for the foreseeable future. So we're a reliable partner. As I mentioned before, our facilities are subsidized, so we're a low-cost option. And as you will have heard before in previous sessions, there's the R&D tax incentive that you may qualify to make working with ANFF even cheaper. The other thing that may appeal to you is that even though the capability may exist in Singapore already, they may not be open access. You may be able to kind of hire the facility to do the work for you. But what you're really keen to do is do the job yourself. Again, ANFF equipment is open access, so you can come to us and book the equipment and do the work yourself without having to kind of entrust the work to somebody else. Now, that's pretty much it for me. I welcome you to contact me anytime if you'd like to connect with ANFF and to help you innovate. As I said, I'm keen to concierge any capability requirements that you may have, help you solve manufacturing problems that you might be facing. My email address is on the screen, but I'm also on BioMelbourne's Willem online community, where I'll soon add a post to help you connect. And I welcome all engagement. So thank you very much. That's it for me.
Thanks, Oded. Listen, every time I see one of these presentations, it always amazes me at some of the products and capabilities we have here. Even having been sort of at the center of this for as long as I have, I'm still constantly fascinated by some of the things that we're able to do now. So really appreciate it. Look forward to having a few questions towards the end. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Pauline Newlove, Program Manager at Hydrix. So Pauline has over 12 years experience in industry, working across project management and mechanical engineering roles, predominantly within the medical device market. Having worked in both product development consulting and for R&D companies developing products for medical, industrial, and consumer markets across the world, Pauline has deep experience in applying innovation and innovative processes to develop complex products from initial concept through to market launch. So with that, I appreciate your joining us today, Pauline, and I'll hand it over to you. I think we're 2 for 2 on still muted.
Unmute. There we go. Can you see my screen now?
We can see it. Thanks.
All right. Sorry about that. All right. So thanks so much, Jeff. As Jeff said, my name is Pauline Newlove. I work as a program manager at Hydrix. Today, I'll be covering the broad area of product introduction. This is a really large topic and impossible to get through in 15 minutes. So instead, what I'll do is address a couple of the challenges that companies encounter when developing new products and some key areas to keep in focus to ensure that you have a successful development when introducing a new product to the market. But first, I'll give you a quick introduction to who we are and what we do. So we are a company that specializes in product design, engineering, and medical device distribution. We work globally and locally with a focus on enhancing people's health, safety, and well-being through technology innovation. We do a lot of work in the medical space, such as cardiovascular technology, point of care, and medtech in general. But we also support businesses across industrial, mining, and defense, particularly within the safety critical design. Hydrix is split into 3 separate sections. We have Hydrix Medical, which focus on the sales and distribution of high growth medtech products, particularly within the cardiovascular devices and services across Asia Pacific markets. The example you can see here is the Angel Med Guardian which is the world's first and only heart attack warning system, which we're distributing through our office in Singapore. Then we have Hydrix services. This is really the engine room of the business, where our focus is on the product innovation and transforming ideas into commercial products through our structured development process. At Hydrix services, we do end-to-end development, so anything from early market insights activities all the way to production setup and transfer. Finally, we have Hydrix Ventures. This is where we will invest in early stage, high potential medical device companies. We can do this in a couple of different ways, either through direct funding or by providing sweat equity through the competencies that we have at the Hydrix services part. An example of this that you can see here on the screen is the Guider surgical hip navigation system, which is an example of a project that we have invested in. And I'll talk about Guider a little bit later in the presentation. So what are some of the critical things that need to be in place for a development project to be a success? There are a lot of things that can impact the success of introducing a new product to the market. In our experience, there's of course a lot of different things, but there are 6 key success factors that if you get some good strategies within each of these topics and have a good idea of what you're doing here, you have a much higher chance of succeeding with introducing a new product to the market. As always, most development starts with an idea. You will hope it's a great idea, but you know, in a business sense, an idea is only valuable if users want to buy it. So, oops, got change slides here really quickly. Which then gets us to, you also really need to have a good understanding of your market, why users will pay for your product to solve the product, to solve their problem, and how does your product differentiate from any of the current solutions in the market? Who are the main competitors? So in other words, what unmet needs are you addressing and who will be your main competitors in that space? Of course, having the right team will be key to ensure that you really evaluate, will be key to ensure your success. And here you really need to evaluate the needs of your business and your overall business model when determining what type of team you need. Of course, the technology you're developing will be the backbone of how you solve your idea. So make sure that you secure it where possible. And a common pitfall we often see in this area is the understanding of your technology readiness level when moving from research and into commercial development. There's a big difference between getting something to work once in a lab as you do in research to have something work reliably in a commercial product. And then, of course, to ensure that you can get your idea successfully to the market, you need to have a clear understanding of your commercialization strategy, how you're going to make money, and who will pay for the development. So, of course, today I won't have time to cover all of these topics, so I'll give you some quick examples that cover a subset of these success factors. So what will users pay for? As I mentioned earlier, we work a lot in the cardiac space, and this particular client came to us with an idea in the mechanical heart support space that was so novel that users didn't actually believe that the product would solve their problem. They had a challenge that when trying to get their idea evaluated, they were always met with, it's never going to work. So how do you go about validating that your idea is valuable if it's so novel that people just discount that that they need it or that it will ever work. So they won't actually trust it enough to give you the feedback you need. For this project, we conducted a range of market and user investigations to try and help them validate that the idea that they were doing was actually solving the right problem in the right way. We did this by conducting a lot of different investigation, but really it was about understanding, having a large range of users across a vast amount of geographies, and really getting an understanding of what their biggest pain points were with the current products in the heart failure market. How intense were the problems in the different areas? What do they like? What don't they like? How are they handling their problems today? And how satisfied are they with their current solutions? This allowed us to get a really good, solid understanding of the users and the market that we're developing for, which is key to making the right decisions as you go through your development process. We also then set up a range of different concept solutions and got them to, and in a conversation, got them to, not focus on whether or not this would work, but actually focus on what they liked and disliked about the different solutions. What features in this resonated with them? What and through this, we got a really good indication of what levers and features to implement in the development going forward. Finally, with novel technology, you always want to know what the adoption barriers could be into the market. What is the decision-making progress for new technology? What are the barriers for adopting a new technology? And really getting an insight into what you would have to plan for when introducing a new product to the market. With this in place, leads us sort of to the next question about, so do you build a team or do you outsource? Again, here, you need to really look at your development holistically, both as a business, but also as the development project. Whether you're a startup with limited resources or a bigger company with engineering staff on hand already, you want to make sure you spend your time and effort in the areas where it makes the most impact. Having a clear understanding of the key competencies that you already have and the type of product that you're developing and the business need you will have when that product gets introduced into the market will be critical to getting this right. Again, we have Guider Surgical, again, as an example here. Guider came to us a couple of years ago with a great idea on how to address a multi-billion-dollar problem within hip replacement surgeries. Bill, who's the director of Guider, has a vast experience in product development, and he had done something really smart, that he had sat down and looked at what type of team he would need to sustain Guider after launching the product. And by doing this, he saw that he didn't necessarily need a large engineering team because his product idea was relatively simple and didn't need a lot of sustaining and servicing when launched. But he did require to have a solid marketing department. What he did was he focused on building his internal team in the marketing side, and then he outsourced the development to us. This gave him some advantages in a range of different areas. For example, with the product development, there's always peaks and troughs in how much you have to do. You're at different times, you're waiting for parts and no one can do anything. Sometimes you need some expertise, specific expertise in one area to solve a specific problem. And by hiring a consultancies that have engineering across a lot of different areas, you get an access into this really highly skilled pool of people that can help you with your needs when you need them. So this allowed Bill to both get a product developed really efficiently, and it also saved him the headaches of having to hire and fire people internally, staff internally, to sort of accommodate to the peaks and troughs of the development. So when you build your team, make sure that you have your commercial strategy in mind, and that you focus on where your core competencies are. That's the team you're focusing on internally. So how do you go about determining an adequate development strategy to progress your idea? Do you need an MVP or an MRP? Most of you are probably familiar with the term MVP, which stands for the minimum viable product. This is really the type of product you make to, in an efficient manner, and with a minimal amount of effort in the engineering, you answer the questions and de-risk your development as early as possible. With a lot of our clients, where their target is not to set up a company long term. It's more, it could be cardiac surgeons or anesthetists who have a great idea that they want to get developed enough that they can license the idea to a bigger company, and they can have the headache of putting that to market. For clients like this, or for people like this, it's really around, what is the minimum viable product we can make to get them to the target that they have to allow them to sell or license their idea. That said, to sell anything, you need to show why it's remarkable, which is why we also talk about the minimum remarkable product, or the most remarkable product, sorry. This is really a concept where you're not worried about all the mundane features that is required to make the product safe or functional, but you really here, you try and focus on the remarkable features that will make users love your product and will make investors put money into your ideas. So really, when determining how you go about development, again, here, the commercial strategy and building prototypes or product visions around your minimum viable product, but also your most remarkable product, are great tools to showcase the great idea that you have. This brings me to the end, key takeaways. So when doing new product development and introducing product introduction, make sure you have a cohesive strategy that address the six success factors. You want to make sure that you validate your assumptions around what problem the market and users will pay for, and how to solve them, and validate that your solution solves the problem in the right way. You also want to have a clear understanding of the core competencies that you have and that you want to have in your business, and the areas where it's more efficient to potentially outsource the work. And finally, make sure you cater your development strategy to your commercial strategy. And again, if you do choose to get development support from Australia, don't forget to take advantage of the tax incentive. That's it for me. If you have any other questions, you feel free to contact me directly. My email is here, or you can also contact Hydrix on the email shown below. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Pauline. And also, I think I put something into the chat for everyone to go on to willem.com and get your account there. And you can also find the trade mission participants there and reach out to them through the platform. It's great, Pauline, to see the breadth of experience. I mean, it's not just, oh, Hydrix does product engineering or design. It's really looking at the clients and saying, what are your needs? Where are you at with your product development? What stage are you at? And what are the things you need to get you to the next level and to get you to the next stage in your commercialization journey? And having those capabilities together is a phenomenal, is phenomenal for our ecosystem, and great to be able to share it today with those in Singapore and Asia Pacific. So thank you. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Tom Stamp. So Tom is the director of Blue Curve, a product development consulting business that specializes in medical devices diagnostics. He has more than 25 years experience in product developments and has worked in the biomedical area for over 20 years. Prior to founding Blue Curve, Tom worked extensively with a large number of local and international companies, partners, product developers, manufacturers in both commercialization and technical roles. Thank you for being here, Tom, and welcome to the event.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll just share that. Can you hear me okay? All right. Didn't make it 3 for 3. Look, thank you to you, Jeff, and to BioMelbourne Network for the opportunity to present today and to be part of the trade mission. And welcome to all the trade mission members who are here today. I'm Tom Stamp. I'm the director of Blue Curve Group. We're a specialist medical device engineering, safety, and regulatory consultants. We work with a lot of startups and SMEs. Sorry, let me just get the screen share going. Yeah. Who are we? Yeah. So just very briefly, expert service provider. Our primary goal is to help our clients get medical device and IVDs designed, tested, validated, and transferred to manufacture on the market. That's all we do. We don't do air conditioners or cars. That's all we do. We're also the engineers that can write documents and talk to people. That's kind of the joke title we use, but you get the point. Just moving on. Okay, so you can see here our service landscape. So the boxes in blue are things that we do on our own, and the purple boxes are where we have network partners that help us out. So, you know, I'll start out saying we don't do clinical studies, and I'm sure that Elpis will be talking about that in due course as well. We don't manufacture. We used to design. We design no longer. We actually help people navigate the product development process as expert managers and representatives. And underpinning this, we offer a range of project management and training services to help medical device companies navigate the network of where they need to get through the NPI processes Pauline so well laid out. Where do we work? Well, we work at every stage of the product development lifecycle. So if you look at the top line here, we have you know, a general product development process from concept through to design, transfer, manufacture, and support. And we add this bottom line here: verification, validation, safety, and regulatory. So that's kind of what we do in this space. We're fairly unique in that regard. We're a fairly, I guess, small-scale boutique. We're based just outside of Melbourne in Victoria, and plugged pretty heavily into the Australian ecosystem. So today, Jeff asked me to talk about regulatory compliance and regulatory strategy, and I made the joke that, oh boy, that would be like watching paint dry. So I think I'll just get that out of our system right now. Here we are. So if I do better than this today, then my job is done. Okay, excuse my wayward sense of humor. But the paint thing kind of stuck with me here, because I was thinking about opportunities between Singapore and Melbourne particularly. And when we start out a regulatory planning pathway, it often looks like this, that, you know, the road ahead is less than clear, and there's numerous kind of conflicting indicators telling us where to go. And we often don't know, really, it doesn't make sense. And how can we get there? And, you know, we kind of got turn right, but left here. And we end up feeling like this little guy down here that sadly didn't quite make it out of the way of the road marking machine by the looks of it. So today I'd like to talk about bidirectional propositions. So Singapore to Melbourne, Melbourne to Singapore, Australia to Singapore more generally, and the opportunities that might lie here from a regulatory perspective. And I'll spend a little bit of time just talking about a really broad brush on the regulatory systems and device approval in each of our 2 countries, but also the current sort of, there's some challenges in the current regulatory landscape in terms of what's happening in Europe, the US, and around the world. And there's perhaps some unique pivots that companies in Melbourne and Singapore can do that would help each other out. So I'll just start with a really quick intro to Australian market entry. The medical devices in Australia are regulated by the Therapeutics Goods Administration, the TGA. Our system was, until a little while ago, based on the European MDD, Medical Device Directive system, Class 1, 2A, 2B, 3. We're now in transition, or we started transitioning some years ago to have a more MDR-like system, but it's kind of got a little bit stuck along the way and pivoting in a couple of different directions at the moment. So things aren't perfect here at the moment, but you can get devices through. Currently, TGA recognises medical device approvals from Europe, Japan, Canada, and the United States to support new applications. If you have a device that's approved in one of those jurisdictions and it's a Class 2 device, then that will extremely streamline your device with a couple of exceptions. If it's a Class 3 product, the TGA will still want to review your safety and clinical data and some of that stuff, but it will still speed up the process. CE certificates are well recognized here and will expedite the application process particularly. So it used to be just CE only, now we've morphed into these other jurisdictions as well. And we run I guess, an essential principle system here that's very similar to the essential requirements under CE. As I said before, going back to the roadworks metaphor, TGA and the regulatory system here is somewhat under reconstruction right now. In addition to overseas notified bodies, and particularly European notified bodies being able to operate here, and for those bodies to be able to provide conformity assessment, we now have the ability for Australian companies to become conformity assessment bodies themselves. That process has started, but my understanding is still that we don't actually have one on the board yet. So I may be wrong on that one, but if it is, it's very, very new. So we're just on the cusp of kind of rejigging the system in that way. And so moving into that alignment with MDR, but we're not quite there yet. And so if you're talking about Australian companies wanting to register devices, we used to say, well, just go out and get a CE certificate through a notified body. But, TGA assessment can be done directly, and that yields some opportunities as well. And I'll explain why in a minute. Sorry, let's click on this. So there's actually some breaking news here, which is really fantastic. Singapore already recognises Australian device certification, and we didn't until September. So in September, the federal government announced that approvals from HSA in Singapore will be recognised by TGA for new medical device applications here for certain types of devices. So if you have a Class B, C, or D device in Singapore, that can be used to support a 2A, 2B, or certain Class 3 applications in Australia. And if you have Class B or C IVDs, that can support a Class 2 or 3 IVD in Australia too. So my understanding is that's been announced and the regulation is in, but it's chugging through the sausage machine of actually being formally announced and gazetted and things like that. So it's not yet technically enforced, but will be shortly. So there's a good tie-in between Singapore and Australia there. On the other side, so swinging towards Singapore for a minute. Again, a very similar risk-based system to Australia, Class A, B, C, D for medical devices and for IVDs. Imagine having the same classification system for medical devices and IVDs. It's a great simplification system. I like it. It's very similar to EU style system with some variations. HSA recommends device approvals, so recognises device approvals from many other regulators, and this greatly expedites the application process. It's called an abridged process. There's recognition of device approvals from the EU, Australia, Canada, Japan, and FDA. So we've pretty much got the same list now, with the addition of Australia coming online with Singapore and recognising Singapore. We basically have the same list of countries, where if you have a device approval there, you can accelerate your approval in that country. Additionally, if you have a device that has one of these other country recognitions, and you have been on the market for a minimum number of years, depending on the type of device, and no reported serious safety issues, that can also accelerate your application process. So that's something we don't do here yet, but that's quite a nice feature of the Singapore system to be aware of. So actually, I'm going to jump, if I don't mind, I'm just going to jump forward a couple of slides. We'll just go to regulatory challenges for a second here. So again, more road signs and paint. Here we go. At the moment, the global regulatory system is suffering a number of simultaneous challenges, if I can put it that way. So I guess number one, we have COVID-driven delays. Everything is taking longer. Clinical studies in hospitals were pretty much shut down during COVID. Manufacturing got delayed. Supply chains have gone out. Getting into safety testing laboratories is taking 2 to 3 times as long. Regulatory approval systems, particularly European notified body system, is groaning under its own weight in terms of getting things through at the moment. A lot of that is because of the transition to the medical device regulation system in Europe, which has, now formally transitioned, but the shockwaves still continue. Notified body service times, as I said, are taking 2 to 3 times what we used to see. Costs have practically doubled in some cases, and the medical device database system Udmed that's supposed to tie the whole thing together is now only partially available. So it's not the greatest story on the European front. So for that reason, we're often saying to clients that US and Asia are often a better first entry market. Additionally, real harmonization between all the systems, particularly FDA and the rest of the world, is there on paper, but in practice is taking a long time. There is, of course, a thing called MDSAP, Medical Device Single Audit Program, where companies can apply to get a single audit to access multiple markets. That's fine in theory, but for a small to medium company, it's prohibitively expensive in practice and takes a long time. So again, more challenges there. And then again, in a moving target background where we have new tech challenges for regulators, so artificial intelligence and machine learning systems are fabulous. There's some really great opportunities out there for new types of products, similarly with building in more biocomponents to medical devices, so drug device components, but also having biological components as part of medical devices is pretty groundbreaking. Both of these areas are presenting huge challenges for regulators, and they're coming to the table, but it takes time. So if we think about what's happening in Europe, particularly the shockwave, the delays there, if we're trying to introduce new medical devices, the US is one option, but if you've got a medical device approval already for your device in Singapore or Australia, and you want to be able to go into another market, so by us going to Singapore or Singapore coming here and actually getting approval, that can then open up, I guess, a whole bunch of approvals in third-party countries as well. So you're kind of doubling your money in a way. So just something to think about there. I'd also just like to touch then to finish out really here on where I see regulatory opportunities in Australia and Singapore. And I know that Elpis will talk some about this, so I'm not going to steal her thunder too much, but there's a fabulous opportunity in Australia and particularly in Melbourne for clinical research. So if you need clinical evidence as part of a regulatory application, we have top-ranked universities, fantastic medical centres and medical research institutes all tied together with a pretty good ethics approval framework as well. So the CTN framework, getting clinical studies approved to run in Australia is quite easy compared to many other countries in the world. Additionally, there is a network of network ethics. So in some circumstances, you can get one ethics approval and then run your study in multiple centers in multiple places. You don't need to go through multiple sets of ethics approvals in some cases. As a general background, there's a diverse and well-connected set of biotech companies and medtech companies in Melbourne, and particularly in Melbourne and Sydney and Australia in general. There's a very strong engineering background here, basis here. So in terms of strong design companies, and we've had a great presentation from Hydrix this morning, who's one of them. Favorable tax environment, R&D, tax concession for development activities, including research that you might put into regulatory applications. And I think particularly Melbourne is a great manufacturing base for up to what I call medium volume product. There are some high volume manufacturers around, but it depends where you go. On the Singapore front, again, very well funded and networked medtech incubator network. I just never cease to be blown away by the likes of A-Star and all the other different incubators and startups and accelerators in Singapore. It's just, you've got a fabulous network there, strongly tied into universities, of course. A really great engineering basis in Singapore in terms of engineering knowledge, lots of engineering training and education within the universities there. Personally, I've been involved in the past in really precision manufacture, high-spec connectors, specialist medical and sterile manufacturers, not always in huge volume, but if you want to get really precision stuff done, there's some really great manufacturers in Singapore. Something that sadly we don't have here very much anymore is certified safety test labs. So if you need to do IAC and ISO testing, there are some of the notified bodies and CB labs are still operating in Singapore, which is great. There's a great EU notified body presence in Singapore too. And lastly, I'll finish on this. I know we're talking about Singapore, but as a practical basis to access manufacturing in places like Johor Bahru is a really great gateway, and into the market gateway into the rest of Asia generally. So that kind of some of the regulatory and medical device strengths that we see there. I think that's pretty much it. Hopefully I've illuminated things a little bit more, and our lines are straight, there's paint on the road, it's dry, and the future looks straight ahead. So that I'll finish. If you'd like to get in contact with us regarding any of the services that we provide, that's me. You can reach out to me via email or phone me, and then of course I'll be on Willem as well. So I think that's it. Thank you very much for listening today.
Thanks, Tom, and absolutely your present knowing all the changes that are happening in the regulatory landscape is just such a specialty, and absolutely not paint drying, because it's evolving so quickly. And like you said, in September now, that these new rules coming into place, those are things that we just can't always be on top of. So it was really good to hear from you, and look forward to it, and encourage anyone on the symposium today to reach out to Tom and find out more. So with that, we have the great pleasure to introduce our final speaker, Elpis Barons, who is CEO of Barons Medical Consulting. Elpis is a highly skilled healthcare business and research executive with extensive experience building, operating, and leading complex clinical studies, developing scientific strategy, and providing overall project management for pivotal research programs across a variety of digital health, medical device, and diagnostic organizations. Since founding BMC in 2009, Elpis has worked with several international companies to develop and implement first-in-human and pivotal studies for technologies that have succeeded in obtaining investment and regulatory approval across multiple territories. Thank you very much for being here, Elpis, and welcome to the event.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and delighted to be part of it. And thanks to the other panelists. I thought the discussions were really on point. I'm on the pointy end of the human clinical trial side of it. So once all these R&D has taken place, etc., we're looking towards clinical trials. And I feel very privileged to have been involved in MedTech Innovator based out of Singapore, and also the US program. So I've dealt with and mentored and supported companies based out of Singapore. So the conversations that we have and some of the information I'm going to share with you today is really informed by that exposure to those early stage companies seeking to maximize the value of their funding and seeking to create really important clinical data sets. So as BMC, thanks for the introduction there, Jeff. Just a little bit more about myself. My background's in commercializing medical technologies. I've been involved in that for 25 years and had a couple of successful exits. But I'm working out of Australia now, and BMC is really not only a business advisory service, but a dedicated clinical research organisation. And our sweet spot are early to mid-stage companies, so we understand your journey. Let's turn to the presentation now. And when we're thinking about Australia as a destination for our clinical trials, it is far away. So what I want to share with you today are a lot of experiences that we've had successfully generating really critical value for the companies, getting them to the next inflection point. So what I'll be covering today is, why Australia, and as an overseas company, when do I engage? How do I start that process? And how do I make sure that when I'm conducting clinical studies and I'm considering running them in Australia, how are we going to ensure that the data that's generated is, maximised to ensure that it's internationally portable and can get you to the next important milestone? So our clinical trial sector really has 5 key drivers, and some of the panelists have sort of touched on this. But certainly from a clinical trial perspective, the expertise that we have is globally recognised. We have an excellently trained workforce right across the sector, right across the country, and with pre-COVID, although things are really picking up again quite significantly, over 2,000 trials kicking off each year in Australia. We represent around over 5% of the global clinical trial activities here in Australia. So we've got a lot of excellently trained research staff, investigators, ethics committees, and what have you. Importantly, it's all about data. So the quality of the research data needs to be absolutely impeccable. And one of the things that we pride ourselves here in Australia, although again small relative to other countries, is that we conduct our business to the utmost of standards. So ensuring that we incorporate not only the minimum requirements from an Australian regulatory framework perspective, but also internationally. So some of the studies that we're involved with here in Australia have both European and FDA additional requirements to make sure that they can use that data and move it overseas. I did mention the ANFF, but from a clinical trial perspective, apart from R&D, we also have specialised and dedicated infrastructure of phase 1 clinical trial centres that centres where patients can be recruited into and treated for certain therapies. And certainly the government has put in a lot of funding into infrastructure that's largely and sometimes underutilised. So we encourage companies to come into Australia and utilise that. The R&D tax incentives has been discussed, and I'd say about 50% of my clients set up an Australian subsidiary, and if you set it up early enough, 43.5%, of the costs of that, and that includes your travel to Australia to support cases, any of that early R&D activity, as well as the full cost of the clinical trial, should qualify for that tax incentive. And it means that you get that rebate at the end of each financial year. So if it's $1 million trial, you get $400,000 of that back. Our streamlined ethical process that Tom referred to basically means that the TGA is our regulator, but they're pretty, latent in this process. So they just sort of sit back. We register the study with the TGA, but they do not review the dossier. What it means is that we register it with the TGA, but it's really the job of the ethics committees to review that application. If you're running a clinical study, what you want to be sure of is that you're creating an internationally recognised compliant data set. And a lot of our clients, bearing in mind that most of them are European, APAC and US are running their studies here in Australia, aren't necessarily seeking to approve their products here in Australia. That's not their go-to-market strategy. Most of our clients come here to run their clinical studies and then basically continue on that clinical validation pathway, but really have an outlook towards perhaps FDA approval or European approval. So when we're thinking about Australia, and this is a common conundrum when we have companies who've perhaps done some early clinical validation in a country that's not as ethnically diverse. One of the terrific things about Australia is our multicultural diversity. And funnily enough, yesterday I was on a call with a client with the FDA. We were having a formal pre-sub discussion about their clinical validation pathway. And we're able to, come up with a really favourable outcome for that client, because we're able to demonstrate that, and we got buy-in from the FDA, and I think this is really critical, that Australia has a very diverse and varied demographic of population. What the FDA is interested in is how does that relate to the US population? So the potential differences in the patient population of any studies that you've conducted or you're considering conducting is really important. The clinical practices, so how physicians, clinicians, allied healthcare workers are educated and how they actually physically execute, their clinical practice. The ethnicity in terms of any potential impact on the device performance, and looking at things like disadvantaged communities. If you're looking at Johns Hopkins, it's probably far more similar to Royal Melbourne Hospital than Johns Hopkins and some other, more kind of, community-based hospital in the US. So regulators look towards Australia as a really terrific country with that heterogeneity across the ethnicity in our population and a lot of similarities in clinical practice. So that's highly attractive when you're looking at limited funding and choosing a country where you want to run a clinical study. And Melbourne in particular has got enormous diversity in our population. Very briefly, the sort of clinical trials that are conducted, this is from a report from an industry association, spans the full breadth from therapeutics to diagnostics to devices to digital health. So if you're interested in running a study, there's probably a very good site here that we could connect you into. We mentioned compliance, and there's a bundle of different, compliance standards that we usually apply to clinical trials, and they are not only local Australian ones, NHMRC being one of them, but, and GCP, good clinical practice, but also additional ones that are internationally recognised. So again, rest assured that when you come to Australia, that it's, the quality of your data set is paramount. So we're thinking about, clinical trials. We know that we're going to have to do them at some point. When do you engage? I'd say at that concept and design stage, you should already be having conversations. So we encourage our clients to perhaps connect in with investigators, potential investigators, key opinion leaders. We have one client who now has the, our primary trial site here in Australia as their one of their key scientific advisors. So, and that helped them as they started to iterate and develop their product development pathway, and also really provided a lot of really critical information to and validation of their concept and their go-to-market strategy when it came to the investor discussions. So my strong encouragement is think about it very early on, because it will of course change as things mature through that process, but engage early. So how do you navigate this process? Well, the partner that you're going to choose for running a clinical study is either a commercial or academic one, most likely. From a commercial perspective, we're talking about the requirement that the TGA has to have a local entity responsible for a clinical study. So you can't have an overseas entity running a clinical study with no local representation here in Australia. So the way that we get around that is that a manufacturer may decide to set up a local subsidiary and act as the sponsor. So they're a subsidiary of the parent company. Alternatively, you come to a company like myself, Barons Medical Consulting, where we act on your behalf. We're a contract research organisation, effectively the local sponsor, but our approach is always collaborative, and we integrate very tightly into the clinical affairs department of our clients to make sure that we work really closely and act on their behalf so that they're fully cognizant of what it is that we're doing. Excuse me. Academic investigator-led studies are also really expedient. They can be cost effective, and that's often the way that relationships start. But what we find with the investigator-led studies is that they take a lot longer, and the controls aren't as tight. So, but in any case, you've got the options. Have conversations early on, and you'll navigate that pathway. Just very briefly with this slide, the sorts of clinical research organisations varies from small companies like BMC, where we offer very personalised service and a lot of work with clients on strategy and attend pre-sub meetings with the FDA, etc. But you also have large organisations like the Nucleus Network in Melbourne, CMAX, that have facilities, buildings, chairs, treatment rooms, etc. So participants in studies, whether they be healthy volunteers or in fact patients with a particular condition, can be properly serviced and be part of a clinical study in that sort of environment. So a lot of the investment has gone into the industry in that space, and you've got certainly a lot of options. University research institutions, as another panelist mentioned, highly sophisticated, very advanced sort of setup, and whether that's within a hospital environment or a teaching tertiary institution, the process is very similar, but your options are there. Our process is straightforward. Effectively, you choose your site, you develop your protocol and your clinical investigation plan, submit it to one ethics committee. We have a streamlined process that typically works for most applications. So you get a central approval. You then take that approval to either one site or other multiple sites and don't have to go through that review process again. We train and initiate the sites and then monitor and close them out. So pretty straightforward. A lot of the questions we get is, how long does that take? Well, in my experience, if we get the submission right, if we were to submit in November, pretty much by mid-March into February, you should be approved and up and running. So 3 months to 3.5 months is the average, and overall it's pretty quick, and that includes an independent scientific peer-reviewed process, which we have to do for high-risk devices. Tom mentioned CTN. Basically what that means is we have a notification pathway here for clinical trials. The TGA, unless you have a rare biological, extremely high-risk device, I can tell you that it's probably only a small handful, about 5 to 10 products that are reviewed by the TGA for clinical trials a year. Most of the pathway, most of the clients that we work with follow CTN pathway. So all we do is $390 online registration of the study, and then we're really dealing with the ethics committee. Important point, we've talked about, how expedient and efficient it is, how cost effective it is. And I really want to emphasize, I think one of the learnings that has come out of dealing with a lot of companies, as the regulators are tightening up across the world, what we're finding more and more is that companies that are running early clinical studies that haven't necessarily done it as compliantly as they perhaps should have, it really comes back to bite you later on. If you're going to publish any of your data, one of the questions that a lot of publications ask now is whether patients or participants in a clinical study consented in accordance with GCP. Most regulators will require disclosure of your clinical studies if you've conducted any human preclinical work, regardless of when it was conducted, whether design controls and whether it's an early prototype or not. But basically, regulators really want to see you reporting any of that clinical evidence. And so my strong recommendation is that you do it really cost effectively, do it creatively with a partner to ensure that you're doing it to the highest standards, because if you're talking to investors, and we've got a case study here where we had a university idea, they'd done a small trial, hadn't necessarily applied the rigor that's required in the commercial world, and it reduced their company valuation, and they had to repeat the clinical trial. So we can't select data if you've done clinical studies on human subjects. think about the documentation and compliance aspects. That's absolutely critical. So I'm going to finish today with my final slide. Of course, as with the other panelists, feel free to reach out to me. These conversations from start to finish can take sometimes even years before we really engage early with companies and then eventually get to participate in a very kind of exciting clinical trial activities. So happy to talk to any of the trade mission delegates, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Elpis. Yeah, it was, I think a statistic stuck in my head that of the, and maybe this is right, that for the clinical trial or CROs, the clinical research organizations here, up to 60 to over 60% or around 60% of their businesses with overseas clients already, which is just proves the point that we're used to doing this. This is not us reaching out and something new for Australia. This is status quo. This is what we do all the time. So really appreciate the insights, and I think we've got about 15 minutes or so for a few questions, and I'll kind of run through a range of questions that I've got sort of queued up here. And if anyone does have a question from any of the attendees do have a question, don't hesitate to reach out on the Q&A. So first, I'm going to start, circle back to Oded. And Oded, one of the questions, two questions really. One, what type of companies does the ANFF typically support? And if they, how big does the opportunity have to be to give you a call? Is it if they're still early tire kicking and they're trying to figure out where they need to be, or at what stage is it appropriate to call and say, hey, Oded, I need a few minutes of your time?
I'll start with your second question. Thanks very much, Jeff, for the questions. I'll start with the second one first. I invite people to reach out anytime if they're just kind of exploring, want to understand what might be possible. They might not know exactly what it is that they're after, and they're just kind of trying to figure something out. I welcome them. I welcome their inquiry. I'm more than happy to have a conversation at any time. As for the types of companies that we support, the ANFF supports companies at all levels. We help startups that are just at the very early stages, that are trying to figure out how to make their technology work, and need that support and that consultation, perhaps. And we not just kind of work on a fee for service or kind of open access, but we can also kind of consult on projects as well. So we can help develop the technology that's required for a startup's device that they've dreamed up, and they're not sure exactly how to make it happen. But we also help multinational companies that may have amazing in-house capabilities and expertise, but they're at the cutting edge of technology. And what we're able to do is allow them to kind of try things out and de-risk things that they might have really wanted to try something out, but they can't make the case for buying a piece of equipment that might cost several hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. What they're able to do is come to us, try the equipment with us, develop the process, perfect it. So not only do they delay the capital expenditure, which in itself has some great benefits, but when it is time, when they do recognize that the ROI is there to purchase the equipment, they've already de-risked that purchase. They're able to kind of get the piece of equipment up and running from day one, as opposed to having a trial and error process. They've already perfected the process with the help of our experts engineers, and they're able to maximize the new purchase right away. And finally, the final group that I'll mention is we also support companies that are in the advanced manufacturing service space. Also companies that help medtech companies develop their devices. because what we're able to allow them to do is broaden their capabilities so they can offer more services to more companies and simply use our equipment to do so.
Great, thank you for that, Oded. And Pauline, over to yourself. Yeah, you've kind of outlined you have a full suite of services that potential clients can engage with. Do you often find that they come in and they start in one area and move around to others as not only they evolve, but their clarity of their program evolves and they understand more fully what Hydrix can offer? So do you engage with really small startups? Do you engage with companies of all sizes?
So we do both. Short answer is yes. The longer answer that's probably more useful is, look, we work with clients of various different sizes from all over the world that are very different steps in the development process. So for example, right now I have clients that is a cardiac surgeon and an anesthetist that have an idea in Melbourne, and we're helping them develop their idea to get to a clinical trial. I also have a big company that in Western Australia where we're developing a bigger device and we're giving the support where they don't have it. So for example, some of the projects we do with them is because they have good engineering, a good engineering department, where they need advice is in the usability side. So around, making sure that it becomes the most remarkable product by making sure that it's a usable product that users will love to use and can use in a safe manner. With the Guider example, we do end-to-end development where we've done everything from setting up their QMS, so their quality management system for their business, to developing the device from very front end, the industrial design, the concept development, to through to verification, validation, and right now they're going through and we're supporting them in the MDSAP audits. So that regulatory side as well. So really, regardless of how big a company you are, or what part of the development process is, we go in, a bit like Oded said, we go in and talk to and understand what your needs are, and then cater, I guess, the support that works for you. So we do that for each of our company or each of our clients and the companies around the world that we work with.
Okay, no, that's clear. And it sounds like, if the client comes with these capabilities, you can actually, sort of fit in, and because you have a broad suite, you can fit and tailor your offer to what they need, personalized to them.
Exactly. So we have electronics engineers, mechanical engineers, software engineers, industrial designers, regulatory experts, systems engineers. So regardless of what you need, we will have someone, mostly we would have someone that can support you. I think the one thing is we do development, commercial development. So the few times we maybe say that we're not ready to help out is when you're not quite ready to get out of the research phase yet.
Okay, great. So Tom, I think the same kind of topic for yourself is, you spoke of the capabilities that you have in the regulatory space and that you partner with a lot of other organizations certainly in Victoria, across the ecosystem. So I guess it's kind of a two-part question. How do you typically get engaged with your clients? How do they, at what point do they engage with you? And second, are you open to also engaging with other service partners that they may have a a service capability already in Singapore, but need more support in regulatory or another area, are you open to partnering with those folks as well?
Oh, thanks, Jeff. Those good questions. And thanks for those. So in terms of what point we're best engaged with, I think actually, a lot of our really high value add is that early stage engagement. So product development, roadway planning, roadmap planning. So again, getting back to the roads and signs again, but actually helping a new client map out, new product development process, particularly if they're a smaller company and they might be looking at using one or a number of outsourced providers. So you might have a specialist design provider for either the whole medical device or for electronic and software components with the mechanical stuff being done in-house, or vice versa. It just depends on the mix. So our best point of engagement is right up front if you're planning a new medical device. Particularly some of the early work we do apart from product development planning is the regulatory roadmap planning, and that's just as equally, or if not more important, in terms of making sure that we and the client clearly understands what the device is, how it's going to be viewed by different regulators around the world, what the opportunities are there, how we're going to get appropriate development and test and safety evidence, particularly, and also clinical evidence to register that, and then building a real strategy around that. And as I highlighted in my presentation, there's quite a few moving kind of roadblocks in the regulatory regimes around the world at the moment. So there's no one straight answer there, but figuring out how we can kind of zigzag to success through the floating morass of regulatory challenges globally at the moment is part of the deal. So it's definitely up front. And secondly, I think you asked us about how collaboratively we work, perhaps, or working with other service providers. We absolutely do. So as I said, we originally started out as a design company, but kind of gave that away early in the piece when we figured out that we were actually much better at planning, organizing, and scheduling everyone else in the mix. So we often work as an expert project manager, joining several outsourced providers or service providers together to get client success, be that engineering, clinical studies, specialist areas of safety, whatever. But on the flip side, we've also worked with numerous service providers who have wanted to enter that medical device space. As long as it's not directly competitive to our efforts, we're very happy to come on board with service providers and augment their capability in a regulatory and particularly safety. We do a lot of work in safety standards advisory, helping people navigate that kind of those bricks of documents and how to get stuff tested. And building capability within the Australian and Southeast Asian network. So helping, we work with a number of Australian-based design companies to help them improve their game, basically, at servicing the medical device sector. So that's partly training, it's partly setting up systems for them to do better with medical device clients. So I think that's an emphatic yes from me.
Great. Elpis, I think you kind of walked us through a little bit about your engagement and when to engage. I'm happy for you to expand on that a little bit, based on the fact we've kind of gone around the table and discussed that with everyone else. There is also a question that's come in around the CTN process, but I'll let you expand if you want on, when do you engage? And is it just when somebody thinks they need a clinical trial, or is it when you're actually trying to figure out what your regulatory strategy is and where clinical trials fit in? When's the best time to start to engage?
Thanks, Jeff. So sometimes we're sort of bumping into companies who heard about the R&D tax incentive, kind of had an idea about Australia, and that might just be a casual conversation at a conference or at a meeting. But it's true to say that, a bit like raising a child, you need a village around you to get a product to market. So we dovetail into the process, and what we find is that the most fruitful relationships are ones where the companies have really started to think about clinical validation in a more granular form, because the ones that have really explored potential pathways are companies that really do best in the long run. And I'll give you a really good example. Often when we're looking at product development, those pathways are multiple. and it all depends on ultimately what companies are going to decide might be their minimum viable product, the lowest hanging fruit, the product with perhaps the lowest number of claims. Other companies really want to whole kit and caboodle and then get to the point where they're, really have developed a product that has all the bells and whistles. They get to the clinical validation stage and are blown away by the cost of a clinical trial. So engage with an expert who understands that pathway, who's prepared to work with the engineering teams, with the regulatory affairs specialists. And it's a conversation that I think is really critical. And often what we do is we don't start with a contract with our clients, we start with a conversation, and that conversation can go on for months. So, and sometimes it's just, we're exploring, for example, Melbourne is really the world centre for urology studies, and I've worked in that space for many years. So, it may be that we're interested in talking to someone who might be, a potential clinical trial site, and the product's still under development. So, and also might say that one of the most important things that I think companies should really do is think about the go-to-market strategy and the target territory that you want to get approval in. So if it is the US, right now I'm working with a client, we haven't even conducted any clinical studies. We've been talking for about 2 years. We've got our clinical investigational plan really pretty much down pat. We've stitched it all together with all the information around, that they've up-to-date information from US regulatory affairs specialists. We had a pre-sub meeting yesterday. We're in a really good position to take the investment that the investors have put into this company and utilise it really efficiently to get a quick turnaround on their clinical study. So validated by a regulator, but those conversations, Jeff, really need to start quite early.
Okay. And I have one more quick one, and then I think we're about out of time, but it was for you again, Elpis. It was about the question about the CTN process.
Yes.
And is this done anywhere else in the world? And how would the FDA view the approach?
It's a trodden and well accepted pathway. So really what the key difference is that you don't necessarily have the ID, that you don't have an FDA type of review of your clinical investigational plan. But we work with companies and take part in clinical studies that will go through an FDA review, and also our ethics, local ethics through the CTN pathway. And I can tell you, sometimes the questions, our clients are tearing their hair out because the ethics committees apply far more scrutiny and ask a lot more difficult questions. So it's very similar. Ultimately, we still comply with international ISO 14155, which is the clinical trial kind of compliance side of it in terms of reporting, anything to do with any significant safety events related to the device, for device trials, for example, must involve the TGA, reporting to the TGA. So we don't see it as a barrier. I've never come across that as a barrier. And in fact, I think because the overall package from a compliance perspective is so well recognised now by international entities that, I've got a European client. I'll just give you one example. They're based in Dublin. They're actually in a hospital, embedded within a hospital, and they came to Australia right in the middle of COVID to run their clinical study because they knew it would take months, if not years, to get approval in Ireland. So, and they're now, running their pivotal in the US. So all good from our end.
Good. Well, I think that finds us out of time for today. I'd like to thank all of our speakers once again for sharing their insights and knowledge and helping us understand a little bit more about the depth of the ecosystem here in Australia and all of the commercialization capabilities, or just at least some touch points on some of the amazing commercialization capabilities that we have. Should any of our guests wish to connect with our speakers directly, please get in touch with a BioMelbourne Network team member or go directly to the website through the link I put in the chat today. A final gracious thank you to all of our trade mission participants and our partners for your support, commitment in making this trade mission and the initiative a success. Certainly, first and foremost, to Global Victoria for their support to allow this trade mission to move ahead for Invest Victoria, who partnered with us in Singapore at the physical event, Enterprise Singapore, MedTech Actuator, A-Start Central, MedTech Innovator, and Jumpstart Program, and as well as the Singapore Biodesign. Finally, thank you to all of our Australian and Singapore participants, BioMelbourne Network members, and colleagues for joining us on the journey. It's been a pleasure to connect, reconnect, and engage with you both online and in Singapore over the past months. That concludes our event and our Singapore Victoria Trade Mission for 2022. Thank you all for joining and have a great afternoon.